Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Dynasty Football Podcast from FantasyNowPlus.com. This is Will U. Ryan, the Fantasy Football Philosopher, ready to rip through another episode to help you build generational... Well, I can't help you with generational wealth, but let's work on generational value from those Dynasty rosters. Buckle up. Today, let's rake through the running backs. Be sure to check in for any content you may have missed on the website. We post relevant news updates as well as pieces aimed to improve your fantasy football performance during the offseason with articles focused both on best ball tournaments and Dynasty. You can find it all at FantasyNowPlus.com. If you are anything like me, the past 2 weekends were uncharted territory. A complete void in our lives, forcing us to re-examine our values and priorities, to fill a football-shaped hole in our soul. That's right, we're stuck without football for far too long. But folks, this is Dynasty, and the grind never stops. We've got the NFL Combine slated to start Thursday, February 27th, and if any of you have been following my work with FantasyNowPlus.com, you've seen a group of articles written about prospect profiles. A lot of important data will come from the NFL Combine, or for those who disappoint with their performance or didn't receive an invite, there will also be pro days scattered for about another month for prospects to go through drills in one of their last few chances to impress NFL scouts, coaches, and GMs. I've been working with metrics this offseason surrounding running back analytic profiles. In addition to trying to filter and group prospects into buckets that are likely to hit, I've been working on what I'm going to call a philosophical composite rating, or PCR, to help rank within these groups. I don't think the findings are revolutionary, but I can confirm many things that have been suggested by other analysts in the past. First, draft capital matters. The largest weight in my metric gets assigned to draft capital. The earlier a player is selected, the more committed a team is to the player. Coaching staffs are evaluated on whether the players they want are able to produce. So, players with higher draft capital get more opportunities than players selected later in the draft. I also incorporate the prospect's rushing dominator rating, the weighted portion of their contribution to the team's rushing production, and I make some adjustments based on how many seasons the prospect plays, so that players who enter the draft after only 3 years get a boost compared to players who remain in school longer. I also include a combination of physical attributes and efficiency metrics. Speed score, which is standardized to account for size differences of players, missed tackles forced per attempt, yards per carry after contact, hoping to isolate the prospect's impact on their rushing yardage rather than giving credit for players who just have a strong O-line. We build in their fumble rate to account for ball security, and then incorporate receiving metrics. We look at their reception share, targets per route run, and yards per route run. And we also care about how explosive they are. What is their breakaway rate? How often are they breaking runs of 15 or more yards? To give you a sense of how the PCR works out, I'll share my top 10 historical prospects per this composite rating, along with a few notable items. The top 10 prospects, from 1 to 10, are Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs coming in at 3rd, Leonard Fournette, Jonathan Taylor, Todd Gurley, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Dalvin Cook, and rounding out the top 10, Ezekiel Elliott. No surprise that all of the top 10 were drafted in rounds 1 or 2, as I noted that draft capital has a strong weight in the PCR. The PCR seems to point to a 70 as being a good indicator for a successful fantasy football running back. Of 30 running backs that achieved a 70 or higher, 13 failed to hit RB1 scoring, which would be about 17 points per game. Or they could also have 3+ RB2 seasons, which is about 11 points per game. But keep in mind, these misses included Rachaad White, who hit 15 points per game. Javonte Williams has recorded 2 of 4 seasons at RB2 scoring. Travis Etienne hit 16 points per game, but just fell short of 17. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, in his 5 season, has had 2 running back 2 seasons, but has struggled with consistency. Kerryon Johnson hit 14 points per game, and Ronald Jones hit 13 points per game. Some other misses included J.K. Dobbins, who tore his ACL prior to year 2, Rashad Penny, who also tore his ACL in year 2, Cam Akers, tore his Achilles prior to year 2, and Darius Geis, who tore his ACL prior to his first year and then was waived in year 2 due to off-field issues. So to summarize, 6 of these 13 misses came close, and another 4 were derailed by non-performance related issues, like injuries or legal issues. Looking back through the history of the PCR, a few things stand out. 2017 was a loaded running back class. I've already mentioned McCaffrey, Fournette, and Dalvin Cook, who are 2nd, 4th, and 9th across the history of this metric since 2015. The 4th, 5th, and 6th running backs in that class, who all cleared 70, were Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, and Kareem Hunt. In 2019, Josh Jacobs and David Montgomery were neck and neck during rookie drafts. My composite score also had them nearly identical, but gave Montgomery the slight edge with a 73.2 versus a 73.02. Now, Jacobs finished year 1 ahead, but Montgomery outproduced Jacobs in points per game in years 2 and 3 as a 3rd-round pick. In 2020, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the only running back to earn round 1 draft capital. This significantly boosted his composite rating, and fantasy managers pushed him up to the top running back on their boards. However, my composite rating firmly had Jonathan Taylor as the running back 1 in the class, a result which came to fruition, as CEH, 4th in PCR in the class, has struggled with consistency in the NFL. The narrative of the 2023 class was that Bijan Robinson was a generational prospect out of Texas. However, my model actually preferred Jahmyr Gibbs due to his involvement in the passing game. That result has shown up in each of their first 2 years, with Gibbs outpacing Bijan by approximately 1.5 points per game in each season. So, what does the PCR have to say about the 2025 class? Well, it currently has Ashton Genty with the 14th highest pre-draft PCR since 2015. I'll note, there were 2 players in 2025 that make the list on usage, but Shanderick Powell is not projected to be drafted and will drop significantly when draft capital is added. 28 players entering the 2025 NFL Draft exceeded a pre-draft score of 30. To compare, 2024 had only 22, and 19 of them got drafted. Using NFL Mock Draft Database to project draft capital, 4 players end up exceeding a PCR of 70, which seems to be a solid threshold to indicate fantasy football success. Those 4 are Ashton Genty, Omarion Hampton, Cam Scatabo, and Caleb Johnson. After the top 4, there are 6 additional running backs that project between 60 and 70 on the PCR. That's Trevion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Dylan Sampson, Bashal Tutin, Ollie Gordon, and Devin Neal. Each of these players are close enough to 70 that with the right results at the combine and the right draft capital, we could definitely see them jump up above 70 in the final PCR. So let's take a closer look at their analytic profiles to see what types of swings it would take to breach a PCR of 70. The only remaining variables are speed score and draft capital, which will likely result in a coordinated swing. That is, if a player improves their speed score by running a faster than expected 40, their draft stock should also rise. We'll start at the bottom of the top 10 and work our way up. Starting with Devin Neal, who projects at a 61.63 PCR. He has a solid frame of 220 pounds and a projected 40 time of 4.5 seconds, which gives Neal a chance to improve his speed score from 107 during pre-draft workouts. A small bump to his weight and shaving off a few hundredths of a second could improve the score to near 115. As of the recording, he's projected to be picked 100th. If he can sneak into the second round, granted, that's a decently sized shift, he may be able to drag his PCR above 70. Neal's prospect profile is one of the most well-rounded in the 2025 class. He meets all of the benchmarks I'm looking for in a running back prospect, but he doesn't excel in any one area. This explains why his PCR is good, but not quite high enough to give confidence he will be a fantasy football asset. Looking through the history of the PCR, trying to find a comparison for Devin Neal's profile, Najee Harris really stands out. Harris is comparatively faster, with 118 speed score versus Neal's 107. However, they both earned between 7 and 10% reception share and a .14 targets per route run and yards per route run near 1. Their breakaway rates were nearly identical, 8.24 for Najee versus 8.22 for Neal, and they each had substantial usage, leading to rushing dominator ratings above 45 for each of their final 2 seasons. Moving along to Ollie Gordon, who scored a 63.525 on the projected PCR, he shows a projected speed score of 118, which is already very good. If he can shave off a few hundredths of a second, he can improve it all the way up to 125 range. Even without improving his speed score, though, Gordon could get above a PCR of 70 by earning draft capital in the mid-third round. Currently, he's projected to pick 115, so that's well within the range of outcomes. The major knock on Gordon from my PCR model and the grouped prospect profile is his low yards per route run. He came in at only 0.82 yards per route run, which missed the minimum of 0.9 for the grouped profile and does drag down his PCR. If he can show improved receiving ability to NFL teams and earn a role in the passing game, he could easily beat the odds and pan out at the next level. I think the closest comp I was able to find looking through the database was Breece Hall. Both players are larger backs with elite speed scores. They are still relatively elusive, both exceeding 0.23 missed tackles forced per attempt and earning between 3 and 4 yards per carry after contact. Their receiving work is also extremely comparable, each player earning between 8.5 and 9.5% reception share, a 0.12 to 0.14 target per route run, and yards per route run just shy of 1. Both Gordon and Hall exceed a breakaway rate of 8% and scored touchdowns on more than 7% of their carries. And possibly most notable, both shouldered massive workloads in college, with a max dominator rating above 70%. Likely the most under-the-radar prospect to have made our list, Bashal Tutin, scored 65.215 on his projected PCR. He again has elite speed, registering above a 121 speed score. He will likely have trouble improving that based upon historic trends, but with solid pre-draft PCR, he only needs to sneak into the early to mid-third round in order to earn the confidence from my model. As one of the less heralded players in this class, I'm definitely going to be digging deeper into Tutin's profile to understand whether the analytics are skewed compared to his film, as many of the indicators are there for fantasy football success. The knock on his profile is earning a low 0.7 yards per route run, which is a bit strange considering his strong reception share of 12.35% and his targets per route run of 0.16, both higher than average. I'm hoping that when I look at the film, I will see actual routes rather than just checkdowns and screens. If he can show that part of his game, I feel like he's definitely going to get flag planted as my sleeper for the class. Now, he doesn't really have a close analytical comp. His speed and elusiveness generate unfair comparisons to Saquon Barkley or Joe Mixon, but both veterans were significantly better in the passing game during college, while Tootin again recorded a sub 0.7 yards per route run. So I'm not going to compare him to these players, but he does have some shades of their games in terms of elusiveness and speed. Moving along to our final three, we come to Dylan Sampson. He's projected to hit 65.245 on my PCR. He has a projected speed score of 112, which again is really good, but he's already estimated to run a sub 4.440. To improve his speed score, he likely needs to weigh in above his listed 201 pounds, while still maintaining his speed. If he were able to add, say, 5 pounds, his speed score would creep up above 115 and help inch him closer to the threshold of 70. Sampson is currently projected to go in the early to mid-third round. He'd need to elevate his stock to about the mid-second round to overcome the rest of his profile and reach 70 on the PCR. Now, he's excluded from my grouped prospect profile due to his low breakaway percentage. He failed to earn 15 plus yards on even 7% of his carries, so he kind of lacked that explosiveness to his game. In terms of a comparison, I find myself seeing Brian Robinson's profile with Dylan Sampson. Now, Robinson is a bigger back, but both Sampson and Robinson force similar rates of missed tackles, and they earn comparable yards after contact. Both of them were underused in the passing game during college, only near a 5% reception share, and neither consistently broke many long runs. While Brian Robinson hasn't hit within the first 3 years, in terms of reaching either running back 1 levels or putting together 3 years of running back 2 levels, he has already recorded 2 years at running back 2 levels, so he's definitely on pace to become a hit. Our final 2 players were actually Ohio State teammates this past year. We'll start with Quinshon Judkins, who registers a projected 67.045 on the PCR. Realistically, Judkins seems like the first player who I kind of expect to reach 70 following the draft. He has a solid projected score to start, and his speed score is only projected at 107 right now. So there's definitely room for improvement, either by adding weight or running a faster than expected 40, or you could combine the two. If he can get into the top 50 picks, he is definitely in play for rookie drafts because he will be over a 70 PCR. Now, Judkins was the least efficient of my top 8 running backs in the PCR model in terms of pass catching. He only earned 0.12 targets per route run, which was tied for last, and he had the lowest yards per route run at only 0.73. If he fails, it should be pretty clear it'll be due to a lack of receiving upside. Looking through his profile, I actually see shades of Todd Gurley. Judkins and Gurley have eerily similar size and speed. They're also very, very close in terms of yards after contact. In fact, the biggest difference between the profiles is just that Gurley was a slightly more involved and effective receiver, and then broke big plays a little bit more often. If you're on Team Judkins, you definitely can't be upset to be compared to Todd Gurley. The guy came into the league injured and still put up monster numbers his first year, and then went on to absolutely crush that within his first 3 years, becoming one of the few true workhorse backs capable of anchoring a fantasy squad. His teammate, on the other hand, Travion Henderson, comes in at a projected 67.58 on the PCR. He starts a bit closer to the 70 mark than the other players. However, he might have a little bit of a tougher time improving upon his projection. Henderson's speed score is already the second best out of the top 8 running backs at 114. There won't be a lot of room to improve there, given his solid 212-pound frame paired with a very fast 4.39 projected 40 time. He's also already projected to be a top 50 pick. Granted, right at 50 as I look at the current consensus. But there still isn't a lot of room to improve on the draft capital side. We are going to be watching closely over the next couple months to see if he can manage to do it, though. I will say I was surprised to see a relatively low .2178 missed tackles forced per attempt. It was the lowest in this group, especially considering the hype that people have been heaping on his film. He does perform adequately in the passing game, but his rushing dominator rating is lower than it could be due to sharing a backfield with Judkins this past season. The closest comp I could find in my database was actually another fellow Buckeye, J.K. Dobbins. Again, these two players have nearly identical size and speed. Neither stood out from the crowd in terms of elusiveness, but they both earned solid yards after contact. They were both okay as pass catchers, but not overly featured in that role during college, and they displayed solid breakaway potential throughout their careers. The biggest difference is that even despite sharing load with Judkins in his final year, Henderson had already registered a rushing dominator above 60%, whereas Dobbins never exceeded 50%. So if you're looking for hope, you could understand that Henderson is probably undervalued in this model a little bit, just due to the competition that he was facing from his own teammates. That's it for today, folks. If you've been enjoying these pods, make sure you subscribe to the FantasyNow Plus Dynasty Football podcast wherever you listen. You can also reach me on Blue Sky as @FFPhilosopher, or you can send questions to ffphilosopher6@gmail.com. Until next time, keep grinding.